Today we have Jeff Lobb on. He's a real estate coach. He is the mastermind behind Coach 52. For those of you with Rise Realty, we've had Coach 52 on-demand coaching platform for probably 4 years now. I think we were one of the early adopters on that one, maybe a little longer. Yeah, maybe even longer. So anyways, Jeff Lobb, that is his platform. He goes around all over the US talking about real estate, coaching, lots of objection handling, scripts, things like that, sales strategies. If you have not logged into Coach 52 in a little while, you might want to pop in and see some of the new content that's in there. And then obviously he does once a month live as well through there, which is always a really great session. And he usually has a sidekick or a guest speaker as well during those. So he's been traveling around a lot. Obviously, a hot topic right now is the NAR settlement and what's going to happen. Are buyers agents going extinct? You know, do the buyers, have to pay? Are they not going to pay? Same thing with the sellers. I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. We've been talking a lot about this stuff on our Monday meetings. I'd say the bulk of it this year has stemmed from the NAR settlement and just preparing for a change in our industry. So Jeff was gracious enough to come on. He's going to talk to us about, how he would handle things, scripts, objections, sales strategies pertaining directly to this, because there are some things that are changing. And it's going to be great to get some outside insight. He talks to thousands of realtors all the time. So, he's hearing a lot more than even we are. So with that said, how's it going, Jeff?
Good. Hey, thanks for having me. And we do appreciate you guys being part of our Coach 52 network. If you're not tapped into that, you're missing out a lot of not just this kind of stuff. We're doing this exclusively for you guys as clients of ours, but you're missing out on a lot of sales strategies and marketing strategies to win business. So hopefully we can give some value to you today, helping you navigate some of our challenges. So what I would like to do, and we just came out of a big event in Vegas, really with a lot of these topics last week. And from a sales perspective, of course, not a legal perspective, from a sales perspective, we want to make sure we help you navigate and understand things that you should be doing, saying, and how to help you push through these transactions. So I have access to the chat box. So I'm going to open up the chat, and I would love, as we're having conversations, for you to put in some of the challenges you are facing. Like, what's an objection you want me to go over? What would you say if this happened? And we have to understand your market's a little different than others, like when it comes to local laws. But in general, there's going to be some universal concepts with how buyers are going to now have to work with us, and how we're going to have to work with them. And we're also going to get some challenges on the listing side as well. So we'll kind of start from the buy side first, if that makes sense. So, and by all means, no hesitation to put stuff in the chat when it comes to like things that are on your mind. I'll try and answer them in order that they come in. So let's start with buyers first. And maybe if I need someone to role play through, Trav, you can help me on this.
Okay.
So let's face it. So we have to obviously have a buyer agency agreement, signed before we're out showing homes. So let's first get to the point of how do we get to this conversation? Remember, buyers are used to what has always been. And there's going to be kind of two sets I'll go through of buyers. One is going to be the buyer that you have zero rapport with. There's no like and trust. They're coming through as a sign call, a lead. They don't know you yet. It's going to be really hard to have a conversation to get them to sign something until you build some rapport. So my suggestions for this is, if you don't have any rapport, they're usually calling about a property first. So we have that conversation. We have a conversation about the property. Give them what they want. They have questions about beds and baths and taxes and details. Be happy to give them everything at that level. The next step is when they finally are ready to go see the house, I would really start to treat buyers as if I were treating a listing. We go on listing presentations. We do a presentation. We explain to them the process. We're trying to share our value proposition. We're trying to show them why they should be hiring us. I'm going to say the same exact thing, which really should have always been this way, but we never did, should be treated with as the same way as a listing. So when I don't have that rapport level first, I build it with simply giving them the answers they want. Education, help them first. When it comes to, hey, Jeff, great, I want to see the home. When can we show it? When can we see it? That's all their game plan is in mind. So my suggestion would be this. Hey, listen, the question I would ask would be, hey, Trav, listen, have you heard about the recent changes in the real estate industry when it comes to working with buyers? And either we're going to get probably one of two answers, right?
I have heard about it, and I think I'm just going to go straight over to the listing agent because I don't want to have to pay the commission to the buyer now.
Right. So we're going to get that objection, which I'll handle in a second, or we're going to get the one that's going to say, I've heard some about it, but, I really didn't understand it all, but I don't know, I have to pay a commission or someone. They're going to be confused. It's either going to be, they think they know, which will be a direct objection like Travis just gave me, or they're unsure. So let me handle the unsure one. Then I'm going to go to Travis's direct objection. The unsure one is, I've heard some things, but I'm not quite sure. I would look to schedule an appointment. What I would say is, listen, there are some things that can get a little confusing in the market. What's important is I spend a few minutes with you and your significant other to go over how it is now handled, the type of agreement you need to look at as a buyer. And I'd love to spend some time, sit down with you for 15, 20 minutes. I'd be happy to come to your home first. I would recommend go to their home. Now, it sounds crazy, like a lot of extra work, but I know if I'm sitting with you, just like I'm on a listing, I have a better chance of making sure I can make sense of this in front of you first. It would be easier to go to them than having them to come to your office or to a location that they don't know about. But plan A would be, if I could get to their home, I'll be more comfortable. They would be more comfortable. Have a sit-down conversation. Plan B would be meet them somewhere else before any showing, of course. So I would say, let's spend 15, 20 minutes. I'll be happy to come to you guys, explain to you now how it's going to work, explain to you the process of you seeing the homes, and also explain to you the buyer agreement that you're going to need to sign, not just with myself, but with any real estate agent in order to see any home and property. So when's a good time? And I would look to set the meeting. That'd be a start. That's ideal world. And, also when you're there in their home too, maybe they have a home to sell, or you're getting a chance to get a vibe. That's how I would handle it. If I get the objection straight up, as Travis just said, yeah, I heard about it. I don't want to pay a commission. I'm not signing anything. I'm going to go right to the listing agent. My answer would simply be, hey, totally understand. A lot of buyers like yourself are thinking the same thing. Always agree. Always give them, no defense mode, no saying, well, that's not going to do you any good. There's no defense. It's always like, I understand. A lot of buyers like yourself have been thinking the same thing, but let me share with you how that's going to work. No matter who you work with, whether it's the listing agent or a buyer's agent, the listing agent has a fiduciary responsibility to represent the seller initially. So now, can I step out a second? Travis, do you guys have dual disclosure in your market? Can you be represented by both?
You can.
Great. Okay. So does a few other areas for sure. So A, I would say they represent the seller. Secondly, if you choose to work with the listing agent and they want to represent you on the buy side, you're still going to have to sign an agreement for a buyer agency to take place. In this case, what's called dual disclosure. So why don't we do this before you go anywhere and worry about commissions? Let me at least explain to you how not only you hire me to work with you to represent the home in the negotiation, you also hire me to negotiate all of my fees from the seller and from the transaction. The goal is so that you don't have to have any out-of-pocket expense. That's the ultimate goal. If we were able to get to those terms, would you give me a few minutes so we can explain how this works? Right? So, Gatra.
Yeah, when you put it that way, yeah. Adding in I'm also negotiating my commission with the seller. you know, which,
My job's to not only negotiate your home, it's to negotiate all our fees from
yeah,
this. That's what you're hiring me.
which traditionally, you know, the way we're doing it right now, the seller has been paying them already. So I guess if you can get them over that hump of seeing that more than likely the seller is still going to be willing to do so, I just need to negotiate it up front now.
Right. What's even more important is that you get someone that represents your best interest, right? In many cases, if you go to the listing agent, it's what's called dual disclose, which means they're going to have to be, what's the term, neutral to both parties, right? In my case, you know, so many people think my job is showing you the home. It's opening the doors. We get talked about all the time, but we're just door openers. Showing you homes is the easiest part of my job. Showing the homes. It may take 2 months to show homes. Where my real work starts is the second we write an offer. That's where all of the work comes in that you hired me to do. It's not only the negotiation, it's winning the bid. It's structuring your offer so that we can get it accepted. It's all the inspections. It's all the nurturing of the finance. All of those things from point A to point B. And remember, I don't earn my fee. And we're not using the word commissions anymore. The word commissions from the DOJ's mindset is like, you know, we don't like that word. So I'm using the word fee or compensation are my choices. All of my fees are only earned after we close, right? So I'm working for you entirely the entire time to get paid only when it closes. So we have a vested interest to work together.
I like to use fee for service.
Fee for service, correct.
Yeah.
So the terminology of commissions, and I'll give you a couple fair warnings, only because I've seen it happen. I remember anytime there's a heavy litigation on all this stuff, the last thing we want to do is give anybody ammunition, because my gut tells me there will be other lawsuits coming from this of people who make mistakes at this, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the mistakes. That's what attorneys are going to do. So I saw an example. Here's something not to do, but I saw an example of someone saying, oh, I have this great way of presenting this to a buyer. Here's an example of what I do. And they showed an example, like a screenshot example. And in that example, it had my fee is 3% commission. Your fee is 3%. And it physically used a number and a percentage. Even as an example, don't put any numbers anywhere. Because then they're going to say, see, you're price fixing the number. If you're going to share with anybody an example or have a conversation, it's X%. So I would say, Trev, I mean, unless I'm talking to the real consumer and the real buyer, what your fees are, you would then share. But if I'm sharing something publicly, or here's a sample of what I'm doing, don't put a real number on there, because fees are always negotiable. Just don't do it. It saves people from thinking you're fixing things, right? And Leo, thanks for the question. I'm going to get to that in a second. Good question. So just as some thoughts. Now, if I'm speaking with a buyer directly, my job is going to be to negotiate the highest fee I can earn with the intention of having it paid for by the seller. If it's not paid for by the seller, my second approach is we're going to look to possibly build it into the transaction as a seller's concession. That would be plan B. And C would be, if a seller's concession is even not available, my third option to get my fees paid would be to speaking to our lender and having it put into the financing of the transaction, so it's bundled into the closing costs and paid for at closing. And I don't know if you've spoken to any lenders, but I know the lenders I've been working with are very well prepared or getting prepared to have the ways of structuring fees into closing costs into transactions. So those are my three approaches. A, offer from the seller. B, seller's concession, where we build it into the transaction. And if you've never done a seller's concession, because I came across this morning, some people have never structured a seller's concession, because let's face it, if you're new to this business, this market really hasn't lent itself to need seller's concessions. Right?
Yep.
It's been a strong seller's market. So it's either been just cash, waive everything, over asking, highest and best. But when a market shifts, and it will, to where things become more balanced, and you start to think about a home that sits on the market for 3 months without an offer, and then it gets an offer, there might be new structures to it where the seller's looking for concessions built into it, where the buyer's proposing that the seller pays for some closing costs. The market shifts, you will see that again, hands down. So you may not be used to it. So what I'm going to say is, for those who have no idea what a seller's concession is and have never done it, I would say spend some time, or maybe Travis could put together one mock-up page of what a seller's concession might look like if and when the time allows. It's not complicated. It's often done, but usually the market will bear it.
Yep.
All right. So question, does this apply to listing presentations with a menu of prices? So I'm going to assume what you're asking is it considered like this whole price fixing thing if you're putting a menu of prices? I'll ask Travis's opinion, but my opinion would be, if you're sitting doing a presentation saying that these are your fees, this is how you're going to get paid, and that's what you're going to ask for as a fee, I don't see it as a problem.
Nope. I don't either.
Nope.
So now what if, and there's another one in the Q&A section too.
Oh, I missed that.
Now what about for marketing purposes? Let's say they're sending out mailers or something like that. What's your take on that moving
I
forward?
would strongly not recommend that. I would not put anything out to the public that has numbers built into it. I'm sure there's going to be people that do it, and I'm sure there may be some gray areas in it, but I'm telling you, anytime there's going to be a chance for someone to capture something publicly and throw somebody under the bus, I wouldn't want you to be in that position just because they misinterpret. Oh, they're going to do this for 2%. Putting a number in anything is what the DOJ is trying to prevent, right? You could say fees are variable, fees are negotiable, variable fees, but I would not ever put a number like we were able to years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't, but that's my recommendation, only because I think it just exposes us to be misinterpreted. So let me see what Elizabeth's question is here on the topic. So I texted a listing agent yesterday to ask if seller's offering concessions. She texted back for me to submit an offer. I'm not submitting any offer unless I know in advance, so I get paid. So since compensation no longer being published. Okay. So I'm going to give you very transparent advice, Elizabeth. I'm going to make the assumption, and this is where I already saw a lot of people in chat groups saying, I already got 35 phone calls from buyers asking me if we're cooperating and how much we're cooperating. I would not, me personally, would not do any of that. I would care less. I would look at every home with the mindset that says, my fee as a buyer's agent is going to be in every offer, asking the seller to pay for it, regardless of what they're cooperating or not. So because here's the reality, and this is where it could get really squirrely. And I'm going to give this to you in 2 scenarios, Elizabeth, and to who's listening. Let's say I'm the listing agent. Travis is my client. Travis says, I'm open to cooperating, 2.5%. Let's see what happens. I guess we can go from there, because remember, we're not putting it necessarily in writing what they're cooperating with per se. So let's say he's open-minded to it. And then you call me and I say, yep, he's open-minded. He's looking to cooperate. I can't be exact, but 2 or 2.5. And then let's say another agent calls me. And let's say I don't like the agent. I think they're unethical. I can't stand doing business with them. And I go, nah, I'm not really sure. I don't think they're doing anything. Who's going to know? What's the variable of me telling you, yes, they are cooperating, or no, they're not, or just put it in offer, let's see. I would never rely on that anyway. Even if they said, and Travis said to me, I'm not offering crap, 0. I'll just pay you and I'll be done with it. My concern is we take our buyer and we go show them something else because they're not cooperating. I'm not showing the house. But then 2 days later, a person comes by and doesn't care what the offering is, makes an offer, asks the seller to pay for it, but made the offer $10,000 higher and said, I'd like my fee to be paid out of commission, out of that offer. and the seller could potentially net the same, if not more money, the seller might consider that. They might just consider, because the end of the day, it's the net number. What if the offer came in 30 grand over asking price and said, I'd like my seller to pay my $10,000 fee? They might not change their mind. They're going to net $20,000 more. Why wouldn't they? So you have to understand, they might say zero, but the end of the day is going to be the net number. So I would tell any seller, hey, listen, I understand you may not want to pay you may not want to cooperate at all. It's your obligation. However, what I'm going to suggest is we take every offer and we consider each one an individual case to see what net dollars we work out. Isn't the net dollars the most important? Whether you pay 3% to me and 2% to them or anything, the end of the day is the net. And if they say, well, I'm not going to pay that. I said, what if they made an offer of $50,000 over asking price and they want $10,000 commission? You're going to net $40,000 more. Would you be open to that? Sure. Okay. So we're not going to really say zero. We're going to say we are open to any and all proposals. So I know from the buyer side, we're calling these people saying, are you cooperating? I'm not going to show a house unless I know I'm going to make money. You may not make it anyway, whether they're cooperating or not, because you could just either get outbid and lose the deal. I would show every property with the assumption that I'm going to put my fees into every offer I make, regardless. Because even if they tell me 2%, or even if they say, I'll pay 1%, in my proposal, in my offer, I'm asking for 3%. Why do I have to accept just that? I can negotiate it. All they can do is say no, or here's the counter, and we'll only pay you 2%. Well, here's the counter, but I want 2.5%, and we got a deal. Like, these are things we have to get used to. And if they say they're paying 0, then the other option is that you structure an arrangement where you build in concessions and ask the seller to pay it. You add $10,000 or $15,000 on top of the offer, with that money being paid towards your fee at closing. Or the deal doesn't happen.
Yeah, because they may just go straight over to the listing agent anyways, if you're not going to show them the house then.
Right.
And if, we did the new residential listing agreement, they released all new forms.
Yep.
On the 24th last month.
And I haven't seen the newest of ones. It's
yeah, so there's no buyer agent comp in there. It's just strictly you're negotiating your fee right there. But there is a section in the California one that says if an unrepresented buyer comes in,
right,
you agree me to pay X, right?
Yep.
And so I think that this could be some pretty good ammo when you're handling these objections to say, well, look, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, this listing agreement right here, this is what it looks like. And more than likely, they're going to get paid for representing you anyways, a fee.
They're right.
A fee that I would be negotiating myself.
Right.
So, I think that we can use that kind of against the buyers to handle that objection as well. That more than likely, just because it says this, there is this clause or this line in a listing agreement, they might be getting paid just as much as they are to represent the seller for the unrepresented buyer. That they might have 2 and 2, 1 and 1, or whatever.
Right.
Flat fee could be anything.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, a couple things, and I see your questions. I'm going to get to them. I love that you're asking questions. I'm going to get to. I'll break down the list, but I want to clarify this real quick. If you're use your current averages right now, Travis, as your brokerage, what's the average listing agent getting on a listing right now, commit fee wise, in general?
We're probably hovering around 2%.
2%
average. Yeah.
And on the buy side right now, what do you think the average is if a buyer coming into your office right now, buy side?
It's about the same. I don't see co-ops much more than 2.5. I'd say it's maybe just a tick above 2%.
So if you're really good at getting listings, I know most of my career, I was really good at listings. I mean, I worked with buyers all the time, but listings were my game. I'm going to earn more money on this. Because if you're average getting 2% now, I'm going to go in and say my fee for listing and selling a property is 3%. And to most people that are used to signing a 5 or 4.5 or 4%, they're going to mentally go, oh, that's a lot cheaper. 3%? I used to sign a 4. I'm going to bump myself a half a point for sure, maybe even a full point, because it sounds more digestible in most markets.
Yep.
Now, they might still have to negotiate, and I'm going to tell them, don't get me wrong, that's my fee. While we don't have to pay or cooperate on the buyer side, I'm going to tell you that most offers coming in are going to have asking us to cooperate and pay some or all of their fee. We don't have to, but I'm going to tell you that we should be prepared for that. My job on the sell side is to negotiate the best net dollar value for you so we can get you the most amount of money for this home. So I would not, I'm just preparing you that some may ask or most may ask. But my fee for the listing, the marketing, the video tours that I do, the photography I showed you, everything we're going to do to get your home sold, my fee is 3%. So at least they'll bump your averages, right?
Yeah.
And I don't care what you ask, you can ask 3.5. I mean, some markets you can get more or less, right? So I would go that direction. Now, let me look at some of these questions. I'll go to write down. So we did Leo's. So Phil, are you allowed to do a buyer representation on each home you show?
That's going to be a yes.
That's a yes.
For that, so we have two different agreements now. We've got the buyer rep agreement, which is kind of the listing agreement for a buyer, it's the bigger one. And then we have a new form out for property showings only, and you can put up to 3 properties on that with compensation. And that is that fulfills the NAR requirement of negotiating your compensation prior to viewing a home. So on that one, it's just which properties you're going to go view, and then how much they're going to pay you if they end up, working with you on those properties.
Right. Or you're going to look to get it paid out of the transaction.
Correct.
Now, that's an agreement I would say. No, I mean, obviously, I don't love anything short term. However, for people that don't have any like and trust or rapport with, that might be the starting point to first say, let's look at a few homes together first. Let's get a chance to meet each other. Because I'm going to tell you this, until I have rapport with you and really get a vibe, I'm not sure if I even want to work with you, right? So sometimes their motivation may not be the same. They're not driven. Maybe they're not, who knows? There's sometimes, but look, the way you're working today anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong, let's go back 6 months. You're not signing buyer agency agreements, were you? Really? On most stuff, Travis?
No.
Yeah. So you're working with people's face value. You're showing homes for 2-3 months, multiple offers in and out. Then they decide they can ghost you tomorrow and go to an open house and buy without any repercussions. So considering what you're doing now, this is at least a better agreement in terms that gives some structure to working together. So in a way, it could be better. But I would only probably consider a short-term agreement until I got to know you. And I would tell them, this is going to be good for 2 or 3 homes. However, once we agree, we feel we can work together, I wouldn't want you to have to sign agreements with 10 different real estate agents. It wouldn't be fair to you, and you should select one to work with. So what I'm going to recommend is we look at a few homes, we get to know how each other work, and if we agree at that point, then we'll move on to an agreement that'll cover us for a little longer period of time. Does that make sense? And that's how I would phrase that. So, so yes, that is good. What if it doesn't appraise? So you're probably referring to if I had to do the seller's concession and it didn't appraise. That's probably what that question was regarding.
Yeah,
And
raising the offer price up to account for it.
99% of the time it has to appraise. It's going to have to appraise at that number.
And we have to remember that you have an agreement for the buyer to pay you your fee for service. So that is already part of their closing costs.
Right.
The concession is coming in from the seller to offset their total closing costs, which are including your fee for service.
Right.
So if it doesn't appraise, it's just the same as if you had a credit in there for work to be done on the house or something like that. If they're like, oh, okay, we offer 800 plus 30,000 because there's so much mold remediation or things like that that have to happen on the house that we're building this credit in for. it's the same thing. If it doesn't appraise for that amount, usually the credit goes first. Because the seller doesn't want to, you know, drop their price. They're going to try and eat out of your credit first. It's
Yep.
going to be very similar. So then the buyer has the decision, can I still buy this house without that credit?
Right.
And that's what the appraisal contingency is for. So either they're going to move forward with it or not. They've already taken into account that they have to pay you because you have an agreement for that. So I guess
Or it'll
that,
have to be, or it'll have to be renegotiated, because let's face it, I understand most of you are seeing a market right now that is not typical of a market with seller concessions. That's why I'll repeat that. So for example, I know Manny's asking, going up on price, like, do you think this, like, we're almost financing the buyer's agent fee? It is allowed in most financing. Now, I'm not gonna say all the financing structure, but talk to your mortgage professional. Probably 3/4 of the ones I've spoken to already are prepared to know how to structure financing if this fee had to be put in there as closing costs or concessions or whatever it would be. They are. And if they don't, have a conversation with the mortgage partner to figure that out, because most are already prepared for it. So yes, but you won't usually see this until you see a shifted market. Like, remember, homes, what's the average days on market homes you're selling, Travis?
depends. I was comping a house over the weekend, and there was 3 actives ranging from 13 days to 24, I think.
Right.
I'm seeing that a lot on the inland areas. Some of the coastal stuff is still kind of blowing off the market. Or if it's just a awesome house, we're still getting multiple offers.
So imagine this. Imagine a home's on the market for 3 months with 5 showings and maybe 1 offer coming in 3 months. That's when the seller's mindset is, oh my God, we got an offer. Let's make this one work. That's when the market mindset shifted, where sellers' concessions and negotiations happen differently. So some of you might be newer in the market, have not seen this kind of a negotiation shift. So I wouldn't stress too much about sellers' concessions yet. But when you get a seller that's sitting and needs to sell and it's 3 months and they haven't gotten 1 offer yet, they're flexible. Things get creative, because now we don't want to lose this 1 offer that we have. So take it with a you know, a grain, and don't overthink it too much. You'll see it change when it does. So let's see, I'm going down the list here. Thank you for chats. Competing agents. Okay, competing agents may not comply with buyer agent agreement prior to showing property. Even if we have a buyer agreement signed, another agent may claim that we're procuring cause, or they sign our. Okay, so are you seeing Joe's, Travis? Just so I get. So one of my biggest concerns of all of this, and I say this not just to you, to universally across the country, is the lack of policing or having the ability to police this process. Meaning, I am confident there are some agents who have no clue what they're doing and can't get someone to sign an agreement, and they go, oh, well, we'll deal with it later, and show homes without it. But then get to an offer and then go, oh, we got to sign and make it part of the offer agreement. I know it's unethical. There's fines, there's violations, there's all that stuff that goes with it. But do I think it's going to happen? Probably. So the problem is we don't know if they have a buyer agent. We can ask them for it, but I'm not sure they're going to show us their buyer agency agreement. I wouldn't. So we're going to have to make, and the broker's going to have to be responsible to say, you know, if it doesn't happen, the broker's going to be the one liable for all this because it's under their license. So we got to make sure that we have it, but to know if someone else has it, procuring cause is going to be hard unless they can show, you know, a properly documented buyer agency agreement. And if they make one up and do something else, then that's going to be, you know, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of crazy scenarios. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to solve them all, but you're right. Let's see, Andrew, whatever the seller agrees to under for UB, what's UB?
I'm not
Whatever
sure.
the seller, what is UB for? Whatever the seller agrees to Means they will consider all offers, including a request for buyer agent commission. Andrew, just clarify UB, so you know what that means. I'm just probably missing it. I'll get to that in a second. Open houses, we don't need forms. Open houses, no, I wouldn't say you don't need forms. For someone to walk in the door and view the open house, you represent the seller, fiduciary responsibility, show the house. They're unrepresented, you're allowed to show it. You're allowed to have a conversation about it. It's when they say, okay, I like this house, I want to make an offer on it. They need representation. So it could be you. That's when you'll need your form, in your case, dual agency, and sign it if they wanted to write an offer or be represented. But open houses, you could hold them, they could show up. They don't need a one-time showing form or any of this stuff. They could just see the house. You represent the seller's best interest on that. So go for it. When you request a seller's concession on the RPA, are you asking the buyer's agent fee directly? Nor does the settlement say the concessions must come to the buyer. Okay, so per DOJ and NAR, there's two ways, and it really depends on your state. I have to answer this vaguely, so it becomes a little legal here. In a perfect world, I would like my seller's concessions to be paid to the buyer's agent and or closing costs. But in most states, it's just going to say to be paid towards closing costs. Now, closing costs do mean fees, which if I have an agreement with the buyer agent for my fee of 2%, that needs to be satisfied. I mean, they could pay their other closing costs. I don't think an attorney or title company would let a closing happen without the fees being paid under close, as long as my fee is submitted there as a fee. If they
It's
did,
just not going to close, just like any other
close.
time. Yeah.
And if
For
if they
sure.
make a mistake, I mean, you have arbitration to fight it. They owe you. You have an agreement with them that actually is enforceable. We don't want to sue our clients, but it's enforceable. They shouldn't close unless it goes towards those. And if there's not enough money as a concession to pay all of the fees, you're stuck at the closing table. Who's going to write the check to complete the closing fees, or how are we structuring this? So if I was at the closing table, I would be paying, let's say closing costs were $8,000 and my fee was $10,000. This fee has an agreement, pay this $10,000, whatever's left goes towards the $8,000. That's how I would close. If not, there's going to be a deficit at the closing table.
Yeah.
So fees, and personally, you'd be submitting that as a fee to the closing. You'll be on the HUD. Let's see. Did it on every single one. Didn't want to waste my time. Make sure they're committed to work with me.
Probably talking about getting buyer rep agreements.
Good. Yeah, if you've done it, fantastic. If you've been used to doing it, that's
You're
a
ahead of
win.
the game.
Ahead of the game. Now, the only thing that might be a caveat is maybe having that fee put in there. Because a lot of times the old buyer agency agreements, maybe yours was different, used to say that we're committed to working with you and our fees would be procured from the seller, whatever seller acceptance is. We didn't ask them to be responsible to pay. That might be different.
A little bit. The old one, yeah.
But either way, the best way to do this is that you have to have a consult. You got to sit with people, and because most people don't know how it even worked before this. So I think we need to take the time and have a visual presentation. And I don't mean your value proposition that means here's the laundry list of things we do, because the list of things we do is great, but most people don't care. The value is going to come into is, are they going to like and trust you? Did you explain it to them properly? Did you make them feel comfortable about the process? Do they clearly know, the types of homes we're going to see? Is their financing in order? That's the kind of presentation we need, besides showing them all the things we do. We could always do that by sending them to a link and here's all the stuff we do. But the consult needs to be more rapport building, just like you're sitting on a listing presentation. Why would I hire you to list with me? Right? Here's the other challenge we're going to face. And you probably hear this a lot. Oh, they said they would do the same thing too. Oh, they said they would do that too. Just like if you're on a listing presentation, if you're not visually showing the homeowner something, they're going to bundle you in with everybody else. Here's an example. If you went into a listing presentation and said, you know, part of our listing is, and let's say I'm just telling you this, I'm just saying, we're gonna get a photographer to shoot your photos. We're gonna do a virtual tour of your home. We're gonna make sure you're on Zillow and Realtor.com. We're gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do, like, I say all this stuff. First of all, it sounds great, but I forget about it in about 20 seconds. And if I'm competing with another listing agent and they said the same thing, said the exact same thing, what makes us different? Nothing. Zero. They said that, but haven't you seen, if I say I'm going to do a video tour of your property, are all video tours created equal? No.
Definitely not.
One could be some slideshow thing with photos. One could be some automation. One could be a real photographer, a videographer walking through a professional video. When the homeowner sees the difference, that's why on a listing presentation, I showed them the difference. And I encouraged every homeowner when I was on a listing presentation to say, while you're meeting with other agents, to interview them. I would ask them to see all of the things they say they're going to do to show them to you while they're sitting here. Because I knew my videography or whatever I was offering was significantly different. Where they go, oh my God, that's gorgeous video work. Versus someone showed up with some kind of slideshow tour to music. Not saying it's bad, but they would see the difference. So words sound the same. It means exactly the same thing. If I say, you're a real estate agent, I'm a real estate agent, that must mean we're equal. Are you equal to all other real estate agents? Just like attorneys. Attorneys, you're an attorney, I'm an attorney. Except this attorney gets $100 an hour. That attorney's getting $450 an hour. Why on earth would he or she get $450 versus $100? What's the difference? So we face the same value proposition so that we don't get bundled in to be all equal. The same goes for buyers. Well, my cousin's an agent. He said he would just do it for whatever fee. You're going to have to compete with that. Just like if your cousin's a listing agent and he's going to list my house for, I don't know, 2%. So we have to be prepared to handle those objections and show why we are different and what value we bring, not the same list of things, but why you would work with me. And I would tell a lot of people, most of the job of showing homes is very easy. My real work that you hire me to do starts once we get to a contract and an agreement. Okay, go for it.
So would you recommend, maybe for the more experienced agents, maybe because you bringing visuals to a buyer presentation isn't quite the same as a listing presentation. So would you be showing maybe like, hey, on these last 3 properties, I was able to negotiate X amount off the price, or, you know, this one, these ones here had all had 5+ offers on them and we won each one of them. Like, is that the kind of stuff that you would probably want to toss in?
Yeah, so the same if we did flip the sellers at listing a second. So on a listing, remember we would have sold in 22 days or sold in 1 day. On the buy side, I might have a photo of a home that we negotiated, beat 5 offers and came in 10,000 under asking, or something that shows you represented a buyer's best interest, and what that looks like. And it could be a photo with an overlay. I would also have a visual of reviews of people that speak about me intelligently, and my Zillow reviews or Google reviews, so they can see that. I would also have something that shows my level of experience of working people through the transaction. So whatever visual, usually it's photos with caption words or third-party stuff from your past clients. I would absolutely have this visual presentation. Right, that'd be a good example. We use, and you've probably seen a session or two, if you haven't been in Coach 52 in a while, we did a session. I like to use the platform High Note. We're using High Note in a lot of our clients' presentations. It sends it's a digital presentation, for buyers, sellers, but you can have one for any buyer that calls you immediately. You could have one for a brand new buyer that's never worked with you before, that maybe has things about the community they're looking in, things about your brand and your brokerage, other reasons they should work with you with reviews. And it sends a beautiful a la carte digital presentation to a prospective buyer. I would have one that I would send after we start working together to show you all the things we need to do during the buying process. So having a pre-done, what we'll call high note's the platform, pre-designed, that I could just send the link to whoever it applies to. That's one way, or a PDF doc works, whatever simplest. All right, so let me see. Andrew, there's no secret mortgage trick to getting buyer pays it or works as it being paid from seller proceeds or seller's concession. Yeah, so I mean, it just has to be put into the financing, structured as a concession. But there are some different mortgage programs that may have a variable based on the terms of a mortgage. Not necessarily it's a trick, but it's making sure they know how to structure it would be
That, and I would just advise against labeling a concession to be used towards commission, because you're not supposed to finance in the commissions.
correct.
Underwriters may kick that. So just keep it worded like we've always been wording it, as credit towards, concession towards their closing costs. Yeah, just keep it simple. Yeah, don't say it's for this or that.
Yep. Okay, so I'm just scrolling through some of the.
See, Rebecca.
Could you explain the NAR will change the best represent new changes about buyers paying the compensation to the agent, how it can negotiate various ways in your buyer consult? I think we kind of covered a few different ways to do that, but I'll kind of go through that script again. So if I was sitting with a buyer and I'll say, here's how some of the new changes take place, where a buyer agent like myself to represent you through the transaction, you're going to need to retain a buyer agent on any side of the transaction. And we know they can hire an attorney too in most states, but you're going to need someone to represent you at some point. The agreement states that my fee is to be paid for from you, either A, the buyer, or to be paid for from the seller or any seller's concessions that we negotiate. My job is to not only negotiate the home for you and your best interest, my job is also to get these fees paid for from the seller themselves. That's my goal, is to get everything. In the case where it does not, we have other ways to structure the arrangement so that it comes out of your proceeds of sale and out of the transaction. But my job is to try and get the seller to pay for it first.
Yeah,
that's how I would explain it. May not be perfect, but that's seems logically what most people can go, okay, I understand. Or they're going to say, well, does it have to be 3%? Does it have to be 2%? Does it have to be what percent? X percent? The answer is that's my fee for me doing all the work that I do. And at the end of the day, if we get it paid for from the seller or proceeds of sale, and it's not out of your pocket, would it make a difference? Well, what if I do have to pay for it? Understood. All things are negotiable. That if we get to that point in time into an offer where we get to that point, you and I will have a conversation of how to structure it properly.
Yeah. Party. And then Rebecca also said, also when there's an unrepresented buyer comes into an open house, again, you can talk to them. You're working on behalf of the seller at that point. Rhonda made a note that there is an open house visitor non-agency and sign-in, the Ohana SI. That is a thing now. That's to kind of replace a registration is what that is. And that's a little bit bolder. It's not just like, hey, give me your name and number. It's, hey, here's how some things have changed, how they're working. You're going to sign in here. I am not representing you is really all that sign-in sheet is saying now. I do like the little sign-in sheet they made, or disclosure, advisory, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, you can use that, but yes, you can talk to these unrepresented buyers as they come into the open house, no problem. It's when they start moving on to the next thing and start trying to negotiate price, and now you're doing work for them versus the seller. That's when you need to get that buyer agency comp, whatever form you're going to use into place at that point.
Can you see, help me interpret Brandon's real quick. What would your exact verbiage?
What would your exact verbiage in the RPA to be request a seller pay for buyer agent compensation? So that is actually on page 2, top of the page of the RPA. There
RPA is what? Give me the language.
the residential purchase agreement.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. So of the RPA itself, not the bundle, but the
Right.
RPA itself, page 2, top of the page, there is a line there for seller concession, and it's defaulted to closing costs, and you can check an other box to put in other things. I always recommend against that. I wouldn't do that.
Seller's concession.
Just leave it as default. You just type in your number, and that's all you need to do on that line is just put in the number that you're requesting for seller concession, and that's it. So that's how the RPA is designed.
Yeah, so here's a good point. I think it's Manning. Let me see, keep track of this. Yeah, so if you, that could be really good, Manny. So this is good looking future, maybe 6, 8, 10, 15 months out. Obviously, this is not going to go away. Is part of your value proposition could be like when you have proof on the listing side, proof of, hey, I sold this home in 2 days and over asking. Manny's positioned here saying, and I like it, is, hey, of the last 10 buyer transactions, 9 out of the 10 transactions, I have gotten the seller to pay our fees on those transactions. So my track record of getting fees paid is a good way to put a marketing piece together for buyer's agency. Correct. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, that'd be a good one to add into your presentation for sure.
You guys got to think exactly like a listing presentation, but now for the buyer side. What are the things we're trying to show the buyers about our value, that we have this negotiation skill, that my reviews say that my discipline to work ethic and the availability and this and that, like third party is great. The amount of homes you've closed on the buy side working with these conditions, and that you were able to negotiate, and you beat multiple offers or highest and bests. Those are the things you're going to need for marketing purposes, because saying it is one thing. I'm telling you, verbiage is in one ear and out the other. It all sounds the same. When you could physically and visually show people, that's where you make the emotional connection, and people make decisions based on emotion and justify it later with their thought process and their facts. They make decisions based on emotion. Logic comes in later. Okay, so let's see what we got. So we nailed most of those questions.
Do you want to move on to listings a little bit?
Sure, yeah, let's go listings.
Okay.
So, all right, listing side. Homeowner, same conversation. Listing presentation, in my presentation, it'd be asking the same question. Have you heard about the recent changes when it comes to compensation and our fees? And they're going to say the same thing. Yep. Oh, I heard I don't have to pay X%. In their mind, that's what the media told them. So, or yeah, I heard I just don't have to pay XYZ. Okay, understood. Remember, don't challenge them with like, oh, that's not really how it is. Like, let's not get uppity. Understood. A lot of sellers like yourself have heard the same thing. Let me explain to you what you really heard in like in real estate language. For years, sellers always had a negotiable fee. Maybe in your last transactions, you didn't see that, but all fees have always been negotiable. And there was always typically cooperation of a fee. Here's an example, and I would give an example. In your last transaction, if you've ever done transaction, it might have been, and I would use a number at that point, a 5% fee or whatever you negotiated. And part of that transaction, I would explain to them, would be co-op to a cooperating person to bring a buyer. The same thing still applies. However, in our multiple listing service, we're not allowed to, or in any MLS website or anything related, we're not allowed to display any type of cooperation. period. So although we might cooperate on any potential buyer bringing a buyer's agent bringing a buyer, we're not putting it out to the public anywhere, public facing. So what that means is this. You and I are going to work on our listing and our marketing fees of what we charge to market your home, get it sold, negotiate it, and get it to closing. An example is for this, my fee is 3.5%. Oh God, that's so much cheaper. Okay. Or whatever they might say. Or, okay, how does that work? Remember, it's negotiable. So if they don't want to pay 3.5, I'm going to just say 3.5. That's what I'm looking for in my fee. Maybe it's 3 or 2 or 2.5. Once we get to that point, say, and I would then clearly say, however, buyer's agents, yes, it says that they should be getting paid for by the buyer. In many cases, buyers will either not have that amount of money to come to the closing table with, so the majority of them will ask us to cooperate and pay and share in that cost. That being said, I think we should be open-minded to any offer that comes in, whether it's asking for cooperation or not, to see what we get as an offer, and you and I could figure out how to structure that to make sure you're netting the most amount of money. And I would see if that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, let's get it. I would slow it down a little bit to say, you know, some buyers may come in and say they want 2.5% paid, plus you've got my fee. We would look at the total offer and see with that offer, based on what your fees are looking like, does this make sense to accept or to counter to get more money? We would treat every offer as a separate package, right? Because they don't know if we're willing to cooperate or what we're willing to cooperate. Because years ago, it used to have a fixed number. That number is no longer there, so they don't know, right? So maybe we could save some money. Maybe we get an offer and it's not as much as we thought it would be with their fees. We just have to be open-minded. If they come back and say, hell no, I'm not paying a dime over your fee, it's totally understandable. Here's what I'll recommend though, and here's what we can't prevent. Whether we say 0 or we're not paying anything, that's fine. A couple things can happen though. If buyers do request and specifically ask, and we tell them there's no cooperation, there are some buyers who may not want to see the home in fear of they don't have the money to close. So what I wouldn't want happen is a buyer to be deterred from your home if they're truly qualified. So I'm not so sure I would say 0 anything. You might keep 0 close to your chest, but I would say let's entertain all offers and let's pick the best offer out of the ones we generate that net you the most amount of money. I'm just verbalizing script.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it.
Let me see.
Plus, if you're filling in that second line on the California RLA, you know that they're going to pay you for an unrepresented buyer. They're essentially still paying more in commission.
Right. So when you get to that point, that's where it's, listen, here's what's going to happen. Some buyers may come directly to me. Normally, under old terms, we would get both sides of the transaction. In this case, it's the same, and I can't do that level of work for no money.
Yeah.
So my fee for that would be this, if that happens. And that's where the negotiation will be. And you put whatever fee you're going to put in there. And I would put in what you would like until they question it. Now, remember, I'm going to be honest, for those agents, and I'm going to reflect back on my age a little bit here too. There are times in my career based on market conditions, and I'm going to go back in time a bit before maybe some of you were in this business, but there were times I signed 7% listing agreements because we had to have an incentive offering to put out for anyone who had a buyer, especially when interest rates were 13 and 14%. If you had a buyer that qualified, we were willing to give you a bonus to bring them here. So when I say fees are negotiable, they truly are up and down.
Yeah.
We may get to that market again, but I hope not. But it will change. Most of the time we're seeing compression of commissions. But when a market does shift, there might be needs for incentives to happen. So being open to all offers with compensation, it's open. Let's see what they bring to the table.
We shift into that buyer's market, and I think you're going to see a lot less hesitation from a seller to pay a buyer's agent. And
100%.
I also remember the good old days of being a buyer's agent. It was short-lived, but man, there were some good commissions in there. I saw builders offering 6%. I saw all kinds of crazy stuff, and it was there was just very low volume. No one was buying, and so the sellers needed to offer this incentive, to get more buyer's agent eyes. It was the thought behind it on that property. They want to make the list of, they've got 30 homes for sale around them, competing homes. How do you get your home on the list to be shown when there's 30 other ones just like it?
Right.
And one was offering, bonuses and extra commission and stuff like that to make sure that the buyer's agent showed that home.
Right. And while we can't put it in writing anymore, it used to blatantly just say offering 3% out to the buyer's agent with a $10,000 bonus to the buyer's agent. Like those were things that were blatantly said.
Yep.
So now if we can't disclose it publicly, in today's world, if that market existed, you're going to get an offer. Here's my offer. It's 10,000 under ask, and I want 4% commit, like 4% fee. Like who knows? You just take everyone and put it together with your seller as an individual offer and say, let's go through this one. Here's what we would net out of this one. So you probably need to maybe get a little bit better at understanding, or maybe having a little bit of a net worksheet. So you could put together some dollars. Here's the offer. Here's the fees. Here's the net dollar amount of this offer versus this offer. So if you had a net sheet, that might be something to start to use really simplified to show each offer to a seller.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might have one in Coach 52. And if not, we'll put one there too. And in one of the download sections, we'll put one there. It's a good idea to have that because we're doing a lot of role playing in there too. You'll see a lot more scripts and dialogues coming out in that platform. So let's see. We able to get a recording of this video? Sure, for sure. Got emails there. Okay. So let's talk. What else? Seller objection are we going to get?
What other seller objections?
Yeah.
Well, the biggest one lately has been, I don't want to pay. So that's the one that we've been bumping up against, not heavily, but the one that's coming up the most often is, I want to try, let's try not to offer the compensation right now. And this is in this little transitionary period between,
Sure.
we have BAC in MLS for another week.
Because it's saying 0.
And then it's going to be no compensation at all. So that has been one, let's try it out without offering the compensation.
Sure. Not a problem.
So,
yeah, I'd be no problem. Matter of fact, we don't have to put anything out there. We don't even, if agents call me, all I'm going to say is we're open to any offer. Because I don't want to deter them from making a strong offer, but understand I can't stop them from making an offer asking for a fee. We're just going to determine that when it comes back.
Yeah.
And look, if I'm a listing agent, I'm going to have a little more leverage. Get some listings. Listings are going to have leverage. Because if we do get an offer and it's a great offer, but the seller says, I love that offer, but I'm not paying the damn fee. Okay, here's our counter offer. Now, if we have multiple offers, it's one thing. We get to a shifted market. This is the only offer we got in 2 weeks. All right, we'll counter with that. But at the same time, understand we haven't had an offer in a while. Like it'll be different. So there's certain times you're going to be able to get away with certain things easier. Let's see. So here's one from Joe.
So this is a curious one, because I want to see what you've been hearing, Jeff, about agents who, look, I've been saying for the past week, old habits die hard, right?
Yep.
And I was having a conversation with one of our agents about just this question, can I still take the listing at 4 or 5%? And then I pay the buyer broker. And according to NAR, yes, the buyer broker can be paid from the listing broker. It's on the NAR fact sheet. However, I think that will fade fast, because what I'm seeing in Facebook groups is some would appear to be very experienced listing agents who are excited to go to these listing appointments and say, I'm charging you only 2.5%. So that's going to be a tough conversation to go up against if you're saying, look, you're saying all the right things. Look, it's good. We should look at all offers. It's good to offer, the co-op and have a firm amount and things like that. It'll bring more, offers to the table. However, you have this other experienced listing agent saying 2.5%. We're going to let them duke it out. They can make us an offer, because what if they only have a $10,000, fee in their buyer rep agreement, and you're saying that you're going to give them 2%, So for one thing, the buyer agent's going to lose out money, but for two, why do you want to commit yourself to this fee to the buyer agent? I think is going to be a rebuttal for these experienced listing agents who are excited to only put in this smaller amount, like you were talking about, Jeff.
Yeah. I think, and I also think, and I've heard this coming out of Vegas this past week from some pretty smart individuals, that any co-broke sharing, any broker sharing is going to be under fire to be going away in general. Because here's what, and I know it's in the fact sheet, but here's what the DOJ is looking at too. They're going to say, well, if let's say you put in a 5% listing, that you are going to co-broke and you can do it. The DOJ is going to come back and say, but if a buyer came in and only wanted, 1%, that seller could have saved a significant amount of money, but you already price fixed it at 5. They didn't want to see it fixed at 5 to share. They're going to say, do away with this. Nothing should be fixed for the buy side. So they're going to frown upon that and maybe even change that at some point to have broker sharing through broker to broker. The way everyone sees it going, whether now or 6 months from now, is the seller, you're only to be paid by the seller, or you're only to be paid by the buyer, not the seller's agent, not the brokerage. Seller's making the payment. Now, the seller could also offer a concession to the buyer, right? The seller's not giving a concession to the buyer's broker. They're offering a concession to the buyer. And that was one thing California fought against really strongly, was someone saying, you cannot, it's against antitrust to tell a seller they can't give an incentive to a buyer. You can't give it to an agent or a brokerage, but to give it from human to human. And that was one. So I see broker compensation sharing to be going away in its entirety at some point. I don't think they want anything fixed in stone for compensation that way. But
yeah, we're all staring at this date of the 17th of when our lives get turned upside down. But really, I think that's the start of many, many revisions to what's going on as new cases come about and new challenges and things like that the industry faces. I really think we're going to see some revisions probably early on, after this gets rolled out, because this was, to meet the settlement, but there's going to be problems. I mean, we're going to run into a lot of different challenges, So I do think there will be some revisions to this.
Well, and I'm looking at Andrew's comment. It could go both ways there. So for the seller, negotiating the buyer agent commission immediately creates an opportunity for them to save thousands in buyer agent commission, or it could cost them thousands though. I think it can go both ways. Because if I agree, negotiate to a 5% now, that it's going to be 2.5 and 2.5. If that's what I agreed to. But if we went the other way and said, my listing fee is 2.5, and an offer comes in, and the offer is only looking for 2% on the buy side, or 1.5, we just cost that seller money. We saved them by that negotiation. If we fixed it, it'd cost them money. So it can go both ways. I think that's the challenge. I don't think people want to see anything fixed, pre-negotiated. I think they want to leave that open to discretion and negotiable. Just my opinion of what we're seeing. But I could see both sides of that, but I think it could cost them money as well. Never mind save the money.
there's arguments for a lot of that. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Washington and the Northwest Association of Realtors up there, because they're not members of NAR, so they weren't even included in this.
Right.
And they're actually, I think I just saw something that they're leaving the BAC in, because they're arguing that it's removing rights from sellers who want to do this, and I was like,
Yeah,
this
I mean,
is, it's not perfect.
no, and to me, look, I don't even agree with how this whole thing happened. I don't,
Yeah, no,
I
me
can't go
neither.
back. Like, I don't think we should have lost any of this, but
Yeah,
we can't go backwards because I don't agree with a lot of it. But unfortunately, we have to try and, the goal is, look, there's gonna be a lot of gray areas too. But the goal is, you don't want to be the one they use as the example that someone throws you under the bus and takes your copy of your contract and offer and says, see, here's what they're doing. And it's you that drags through the mud. That's the last thing that we want, because there will be people that are looking.
mm-hmm.
There are
For
people
sure.
screenshotting social media pages. There are people screenshotting people's comments. And let me tell you, if you're an attorney in this world that's in this business, I think a lot are looking for the next level of lawsuits that are coming. How do you see real credit for repairs being handled after a seller agrees to pay 2% for? I only see it as the credit for repairs is just going to have to be in addition to that 2% if that's what's agreed to, and be added as just part of the closing costs. It's going to be a high number if that's
Yeah.
the case.
The commission doesn't get counted into that calculation though,
Right.
for the credit towards the buyer for that type of stuff. If it is commission, it doesn't get counted in.
Right, but if
So if there's a
seller-
3% max and you're getting 3% for repairs,
Right.
the commission can still be paid too. It's not included in that calculation.
Correct. And every state's different. Some can't include it and some can. I just saw a state that had the language in there that has to be bundled as one, which I don't agree with either. But if you can separate it, it would be ideal. So
Yeah.
that it's paid for commission and repairs.
Sellers accept
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, because if there's a deficit, somebody's got to come to the table with money. It's just unfortunate, but that's how it's gonna have to get handled. In the listing agreement, can you put the buyer rep compensation as the buyer rep as 2% or the amount on the buyer rep agreement, whichever is lower?
There's nowhere to put that at all.
Gone.
There is
That box.
only the listing fee now. And I would highly recommend using the listing agreement as designed, same thing as the buyer rep agreement. They've designed this whole flow, at least here in California, to work a certain way. And if you're working against that flow by still trying to build in buyer agent comp, that's where you can step outside the protections of the forms that have been given to us that have been attorney reviewed. Even the Department of Justice reviewed these forms, RLA, the BRBC, plus a whole slew of other ones. That's why they were delayed in getting released, is because, we had the usual forms released where we had all these forms, and then the Department of Justice said, except for these, I think it was about 16 of them, we need to review these ones further. And that was the RLA. That was the limited representation agreement, which I actually did a class on and ended up not even getting released. And that's why I don't like doing form reviews before they've actually been released. I don't like doing the review draft versions because sometimes they change. And in this case, they didn't even release that one. We got the property, the touring one instead of the limited rep. So I would recommend just switching up your pitch, like we're talking about here, as we're gonna take and look at all of the offers as they come in, and then we'll work out the net, and see which one is gonna benefit you the best, seller.
That's why there's a lot of people scrambling to do, because and this is where it's going to get a little gray too, is there absolutely could be compensation. So the sellers can offer compensation to everybody. It just cannot be put in the MLS or on an MLS website or in a public face. Now, some people might say, well, my web page doesn't go to IDX and stuff. And yes, theoretically, by law, you can put it on a separate page of a website that does not get pulled into MLS and IDX and on public facing sites. However, I still think you're setting yourself up for putting out a number when you just take the position is, yes, my seller's open-minded. I won't have to say my seller's open-minded to any and all offers and compensation. Let's just show the property, put it in your offer, and let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Let them put in, because you're going to find some agents that can't negotiate with a buyer. They're going to come in with, my fee is $2,000 or something, because that's what their cousin's uncle said they would do. Okay, that's going to weigh out more in an offer if the seller only has to pay that versus someone that comes in with 3%. We'll see how the offers come in. So some people are going to do fixed flat fees. Some people are going to put in some rounded number. Well, just show one house. I'll make this offer and I'll pay you, put in like $3,000. Some people are going to do that. I don't agree with it. But if we're on the sell side, let's consider anything. Weigh out the net numbers. Which one's better? Which one's terms are better? Let's face it, we look at terms all the time. Well, look, this one's financed. This one has a condition, home sale condition, and this one's cash. Okay, well, that's different. Let's figure that out too. Which one's going to be better for us? Which one's got least stickiness? Just you're weighing in now net numbers now. Same thing.
Yeah.
So it's really not that big of a difference. If you take the neutral, everyone's going to be starving for these phone calls and texts. I'm not showing this, blah, blah, blah. Just show the properties. You have a buyer agency agreement. I would make sure your buyer agency agreement has a strong number in it, because I don't think California's changed this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Although in New Jersey, it just did. I don't believe it. They did it, but they did. If my buyer agency agreement says the buyer's to pay me 2%, but the seller is willing to cooperate 2.5%. Can I get the 2.5%, or am I capped at 2%?
Capped at 2%.
That's right. Capped at 2%. You can only get paid by one party up to the amount you've negotiated in that buyer agency agreement, not more.
Yeah.
So
I've seen actually a lot that have gone the other way. They're like, well, I'm going to put more in the buyer agency agreement.
Yeah.
And then negotiate that afterwards with the buyer, which I've seen mixed reviews on that. Have you seen anything about that, about modifying your buyer rep agreement after the offer's been made? Have you heard?
I mean, Manny's position, same thing. I would probably do this when Manny's recommending it here to everyone. That's probably where I would take a position. My fee's 3%. Settlement says the buyer agent must negotiate the fee with the buyer. We can consider buyer's concessions based on the merit of the offer. Yeah, your home sells quickly, but the developers may not have to give anything. On the other hand, yeah, that's it. I would absolutely my fee. And I'm gonna say, look, on every offer we make, we're gonna ask the seller to contribute towards this fee, or I'll pay for it all. The best we can do. We're gonna negotiate into every offer. This is how it's working. Now, the one caveat's going to be, and this is going to happen, especially probably in your market too. I know in our market's going to happen. You're going to get a listing agent. It takes I don't know, 3 or 3.5 or whatever, 2.5%, whatever it is. But let's say they negotiate a little bit more. They get 3.5. And the buyer goes to an agent, tries to explain to them to sign some document. They didn't know how to explain it. So screw that. I'm going to go to the listing agent direct. And they come to me. And I, as the listing agent, knowing I'm getting 3 or 3.5 already, maybe a little more flexible on my buy side terms. I get them to sign, they're going to sign that there's a fee, but maybe my fee, and I'm not saying I agree with this, maybe my fee is only 1 point. So I'm going to get buy side, sell side for 3.5 plus 1. I'll get 4.5% on both sides. People are going to do it. They may not hold to their full buyer agency fee, buy side fee, if they have both sides of the transaction. But that happened anyway, either way. How many times, I'm going back into some of my creative days, was in a listing agreement, sometimes we used to say, well, my fee is 5%. However, if I bring the buyer myself, I'll take 4 or whatever I agreed to in order to get the listing when I was competing with commissions. Okay, the next thing you know, I end up double ending it and it's 4, but I got 4%. So things are going to happen that way. So we just have to make sure we understand all the scenarios, right? Because commissions are going to be under compression anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So listing side, I think we got that covered for the most part.
A lot of buy side talk. I think that's the biggest fear out there right now, is handling that.
Yep, getting them to sign the agreement. Remember, start short term if there's an absolute objection to signing anything. I don't want to sign anything. I don't even know who you are. How can I, hey, listen, I know you want to see the home. It looks like a beautiful home. I'm available to show it on Sunday. Why don't we do this? We have a short-term agreement that'll cover just a few houses that we show first. Let's take a look at those couple houses first. It's an agreement that'll just cover 2 or 3 showings. And then you and I could decide if we're ready to work together on a future basis. This is how we all have to sign something to get you into the home. So let's start with a short-term agreement of 3 homes or 2 or 3 homes. We get that signed, and from there we move forward. When's a good time to meet you? That comes to us before we go to the showings so that we can go over this. We got to get it signed.
Yep. And
So
something I've been bringing up too is it's been a little challenging right now. And I have heard a couple buyers say, well, I don't have to sign this. That hasn't started yet. And so that has been a pushback. But here in the next week or two, everybody's going to be doing it. So really the objection, I mean, if a buyer is not going to sign this thing ever for anything, they're probably not going to buy a house very easily, or they're going to be way out of compliance if they go to a listing agent direct, because the listing agent will have to get a compensation agreement with them. They can't just write the offer for the buyer.
have to get something.
So it's either a non-agency, or at minimum, they have to get the property showing one in place. So if they don't do the whole buyer rep agreement, so they're gonna have to sign something with somebody.
What's the likelihood, and this happened in another conversation with a different group, of someone saying, my attorney's going to write it for me. They just said they'll represent me, write the deal. Is that likely in your market that an attorney will represent?
It's pretty low, and I don't even know how they save money with that. So
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because that was one where someone said, oh, in their market, an attorney said they would do it for their fee and they would just charge per offer, write the offer. Okay, so let's say their closing fee is $1,400 and they charge you $500 for an offer or whatever. It's still cheaper than 2 or 3%. I said, well, okay, but there's got to be other values and services in there, because the question came up is, okay, so when there's home inspection, who's going to let the buyer into the house and be responsible for the buyer? I'm not as a seller agent. I'm not going to take responsibility for your buyer to come through my house, and if they do something wrong or stupid, I'm not responsible. I represent the seller. Who's going to let them in? Who's going to walk them through that stuff? That's got to be on the attorney.
mm-hmm.
That was a little pushback we were hearing in conversation. Although I have some fun things to say about an attorney. I love attorneys and they have their place. But in many cases, I would just say, listen, what are you going to do if highest and best is Saturday night by 8 o'clock? Is your attorney available Saturday night at 8 o'clock? Will they be available? Because I want to make sure we get this done.
Yeah.
Call your attorney picks up Saturday night.
Yeah, they are not answering the phone after 5 o'clock. That is
right.
For sure.
So I just I would have some fun with that too. But at the same time, I get it. Some might say, well, listen, I'll charge you per offer, and they'll let you in the house for home inspections. They have to. But as a seller's agent, I'm not sure I would let a buyer and their people in the house, because if something goes wrong, something breaks, they steal something, God knows what can happen. I'm the one that let them in. So I'd tell the attorney, I'm not sure. I'm not letting anybody without representation. Who are you sending? Or the CO, or who gets the CO in your market, buyer or seller? Certificate of occupancy or fire certifications. Does the buyer have to do any of that, or it's all on the seller?
It's negotiable on the fire. Typically the homeowner orders that, yes, but either party can pay for it.
I got you. Because sometimes too, or if an inspection is going to take place and they're like, well, we'll be there between 10 and 12. Who's going to stand there and wait for them?
Yeah.
Somebody's gotta let them in and be responsible for taking them through the house. It's not open house time where you get to tour the house on your own. It's still someone's home, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think it gets sticky there if you get into that situation, but hopefully we don't go too much in that market.
Yeah.
But just in case you do.
Cool. Well, I think we covered
Yeah.
quite a bit of stuff, a lot of role playing. That was fun. Hopefully it kind of, get you thinking about, the upcoming weeks and how you're, hopefully you've already been preparing, but if you haven't, start getting prepared. And I think probably the biggest takeaway for me is on the buyer side and getting your value proposition. I've been talking about this for months. Get your value proposition, write it down, memorize it so that you can answer these questions quickly and efficiently and without stuttering. Why should I work with you? Why should I pay you? I don't want to pay you. What is your value as a buyer's agent? And take the market, whatever market you're in, buyer's market, seller's market, transitioning market, take that into account with your pitch as well, because sometimes you're going to be more valuable than other times. Especially if it's a buyer's market. I mean, I don't even know why a buyer would go to a listing agent directly in a buyer's market, but
No, you have to be
yeah.
confident. Remember, they're going to evaluate if they have a choice now to sign with you or somebody else. You have to be confident. I mean, I understand we're not going to know everything. I don't know everything, and there's times I might say, that's a great question. I need to look into that for you. That would be but you can't be, I'm not really sure about that. I don't know. How does that, you can't play like you have no clue, because they're going to walk away going, he didn't know anything. I'm not sure I want to work with him. He didn't know answers to any of this stuff. So I understand you might not know everything. This is why it's a craft. We're in sales, right? We have to learn that we have to handle objections and understand the majority of them. There's going to be one-offs that no one's going to know the answer to. But the majority, let me tell you how this is going to work. To help you understand how we can make the best of this together. And the goal is you provide them, and I like the way I say this sometimes, is we're going to provide you with enough information so that you understand the process and give you all of the tools you need to make a good business decision. Telling them that I want you to make a good business decision when we're done. Yeah, I want that decision to be me, but that's the goal. Yeah. So, it takes practice. So just try and get confident with it. Role play in your own head. Role play with your colleagues. Reach out to us if you want to role play more. Reach out to Travis. He'll play with we're here to help. You got resources. I mean, you guys engage us to help you too, but feel free to leverage both of us so that you guys go make money. Don't let this stall you. We need transactions.
Yeah.
Right? That's the name of the game.
Wouldn't focus on being perfect, just be real. So,
be real. And if you really don't know, tell them, that is a great question. We haven't even come across that yet. Let me get you some answers. I'll be right back to you on that.
Yep. So awesome.
All right.
Well, it's great having you on. And of course, we'll be in touch. And I want to thank everybody for joining in today. Great questions. And we're just going to keep the conversation going. This upcoming Monday, we're probably going to be going over a lot of buyer rep stuff and the new agreements and stuff like that. So we will have you fully prepared. Last week was listing agreement. We handled objections today, and then next week will be buyer rep agreement, and then we're in for some changes. So hope everybody has a great week. Thank you, Jeff, for coming on again, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
See you.
All right.